One of the things that got announced at one of our assemblies was, hey, there's this essay competition coming up. The topic kind of caught my ear. Basically, they said, hey, there's this competition. You can write an essay. There's some new technology out there that they at the time referred to as the global information infrastructure. Today, we would call it the internet. And they said they're looking for the perspectives of young people on what we can use this technology for. My first thought was, well, if we're connecting a lot of people together, this could be a great way to teach people how to read and write. This is a great way to redress illiteracy. And so I wrote an essay about the promise that I saw in the technology and ended up being selected. There were just tremendous opportunities that came from that one essay that I wrote as a student in high school. And that really kind of sparked my interest in tech overall.
From the IT company, it's Made Right Here, the stories of East Tennessee founders, creators, and builders. From the idea behind it to the impact it had on the community, their employees, and their personal lives, we're taking you behind the scenes of the movements they built. I'm Paul Sponcia, and on today's show, we have part one of my chat with Brandon Bruce, co-founder of Cirrus Insight and Uncat, as well as a local nonprofit and community builder. Listen in as we hear Brandon's fascinating story from growing up in a small town in California with a legit outhouse at his school to speaking at the G7 summit when he was only 16 years old.
So I'm Brandon Bruce. I am here in Knoxville, Tennessee, home of the mighty Tennessee River and the Vols and all things good about the Maker City. I'm the co-founder and former COO of a software company called Cirrus Insight. And I just launched a new software company here a couple weeks ago called Uncat. I grew up in a small town, population 800, called Los Olivos, which is in California. For folks that have watched the movie Sideways about a couple guys going to wine country, that's where Los Olivos is. So the first winery they visit in the movie Sideways was the Sanford Winery. And my only classmate in grade school was their daughter. She and I were in a class of 2 in elementary school. It was out in the sticks. So a lot of kind of self-paced learning, a lot of hikes in the woods, a lot of outdoors time. We had outhouses there. There were tarantulas, there were rattlesnakes. It was a great place to go to grade school. So obviously a small school there, a small middle school with a class of 15. Got to do a lot of science projects, a lot of journaling, a lot of kind of hands-on activities that I really enjoyed. And, when I look back at those experiences, then I'm not surprised that I was interested in kind of this wild journey of being an entrepreneur, because you get to do lots of different things at the same time. I'm definitely one of those folks where my resume doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm not a specialist. I'm a generalist. I like doing lots of different things during the day, during the week, during the year. And so getting a new company off the ground where you got to do a million things at the same time, I think was really appealing to me.
You said it, and I read about it, that your school literally had an outhouse, like no plumbing for a snow sewer.
Yeah, they added some of that later, but at the time I went, it was outhouses. So if you were at recess playing soccer or taking a hike or doing something, then you headed to the outhouse, and first things first, you check for yellow jackets. You learn that at a young age.
Why did you guys live in that little town?
It's about 45 minutes north of downtown Santa Barbara, and I think a couple reasons. My parents are from the Midwest, so being a Wyoming kid, I think my dad, liked the idea of being in a rural area, right? For folks watching or listening that have been to Wyoming, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, you can drive in Wyoming for 4 or 5 hours and not see another car. I think also a big reason is, Santa Barbara is a very expensive place to live. So, being 45 minutes north, where it's, more rural, it's more accessible. You can get, easier to get into a house and buy things there than it is in Santa Barbara. It's a very expensive market.
In a small community like that, were there things like sports and activities that you could participate in?
A lot of soccer. That was my favorite sport. I played basketball, volleyball, tennis.
You said basketball. I mean, you're a tall dude, 6'8". So 6'8", growing up in a little town. Like, I imagine you were the tallest. I mean, you had to be the tallest guy in town, unless your dad or mom or somebody's like super tall too.
Yeah, no, I was one of the tallest. My brother is 6'6", so the two of us growing up were both tall. we made for a really strong doubles team because we could cover the tennis court really well together. My brother's a great tennis player.
What about your parents? Were you intact family? What did they do? Like, what's the background there?
Growing up, my dad was working for a defense contractor, Raytheon, which made radar and jamming systems in Santa Barbara. And then my mom had a number of jobs. She was the executive director of a number of nonprofit organizations and schools. So she was on the board of my grade school. She was the executive director of my middle school. And she ran a number of nonprofits, including court-appointed special advocates in Santa Barbara that helps connect mentors and volunteers with young people who are involved in the court system to advocate for their best interests. So yeah, it was very, my dad coached all my teams, coached my soccer teams, coached my basketball teams. My mom was super involved, obviously, with us growing up, to piano lessons and every other activity under the sun. A very, very tight-knit family. We did everything together.
You went to UC Santa Barbara. Anything significant about that? Was it just close? And, is there anything significant about that experience?
Yeah, it was close by. I grew up, going to games at UC Santa Barbara. Prior to that, the high school I went to was a really top high school called Kate School. It was a boarding school, right? So that was a big deal. Such a close-knit family, but I went away for 3 years to go to boarding school there. So obviously I could visit home on the weekends, and my parents came to all my games and so forth, but I was still about 45 minutes away from home. Being there, one of the things that got announced at one of our assemblies was, hey, there's this essay competition coming up. The topic kind of caught my ear. Basically, they said, hey, there's this competition. You can write an essay. There's some new technology out there that they at the time referred to as the global information infrastructure. Today, we would call it the internet. And they said they're looking for the perspectives of young people on what we can use this technology for. My first thought was, well, if we're connecting a lot of people together, this could be a great way to teach people how to read and write. This is a great way to redress illiteracy. And so I wrote an essay about the promise that I saw in the technology, and ended up being selected as one of I think there were 5 winners from the United States, 41 from around the world. And it was sponsored by the chairman of Sega Corporation, which was a big game maker from Japan. And so I got a computer, and then I got a trip to Japan, which was my first big, international travel experience. So I got to meet in Japan and meet all these amazing students from around the world. And we kind of talked about the internet and what the future might look like. That was a huge experience for me because it opened up a lot of connections with other people from other countries around the world. And it sparked my interest in the internet and technology, right? So I had a very early AOL account and was active on bulletin boards, and just started to learn about, Netscape was just coming on the scene, was just IPOing when I was in Japan. And so it's like, okay, the World Wide Web is starting. And so all that really caught my imagination. That trip then led to opportunities where I got to go to South Africa and speak at a G7 conference. So I lobbied the U.S. Department of Commerce to try to get permission to go to the conference. I flew down there to Johannesburg and basically lobbied to say, I want to deliver a report on what we accomplished in Japan. And they said, well, we don't know if we can get you into the agenda, but if you kind of stand off to the side, if we get a break, we'll let you know, and we'll try to get you in. And there was a satellite link delay between the remarks by the vice president of South Africa, who was introducing Al Gore to announce a big telecom aid package for Africa. And because of that satellite delay, we were able to present some of the work we had done in Japan. That got the attention of the United Nations. And so we got invited to go spend a week on fellowship in Switzerland. And that led to a talk at a big World Telecommunication Development Conference in Malta. So it's like you kind of see the dominoes of that first experience leading to all these experiences. And as a young person, going to Japan was 15. And then, South Africa, 16, and then some of those other conferences, kind of 17, 18. And there was another conference in Malaysia I got to go to, a global knowledge conference in Boston, UCLA. So there were just tremendous opportunities that came from that one essay that I wrote as a student in high school. And that really kind of sparked my interest in tech overall.
So just so I get this right, at 16 years old, you were presenting at the G7 summit.
Yeah. I mean, just a phenomenal opportunity. Here I am at boarding school, and I knew this G7 conference was coming up. And the original idea for the Junior Summit, which was the name of the conference in Japan, had been floated at a G7 conference. So as chairman of SEGA had said, you know what we should do? We should ask young people what they think about the internet, about the global information infrastructure. And essentially they said, yeah, that's a great idea. You should do it. And so he said, okay, I will, right? And he put up the money to do it. And so, phenomenal commitment on his behalf. It's fun to look back at like what a big difference that one commitment from an executive made to, students around the world and sort of the formation of their ideas around tech and their careers, and the connections we all made with different countries was pretty amazing. So yeah, then I went back to boarding school and I was like, we should really go to that conference in South Africa. That's a great opportunity. And so there was a payphone down the hall from my room. And so every chance I got after school, I just feed that thing with quarters, and I was calling Department of Commerce saying, hello, I'm a student in California and I would like to go to a G7 conference in South Africa. And I just need a little letter from you all giving your blessing that I'm allowed to join your delegation. And it was like, wow. Who? What? Our delegation? What are you talking about? But I called them enough where they finally said, look, here's the thing. We'll allow you, we'll put your name on the delegation, but you got to get yourself there. You're not going to be with us, but if you can get yourself there, you can line up your flight and your lodging, and you got to get your own passport and take care of all that stuff, then yes, you can come. That's fine. And so I was like, good, that's all I need to know.
Did you already have permission from your parents at that point?
My parents saw how excited I was about it. Yeah. And I think they also appreciated that I was working to do it. Like I was hustling to try to get the letter. And so they were like, hey, if you're going to go do that on your own, you're going to make all the calls, you're going to get the letter, you're going to line up the paperwork and set up this trip. We absolutely want to support you in that, because we can tell how much it matters to you. Now, granted, this was during a time in South Africa's history that was kind of fraught. Apartheid had just ended, which also meant the end of sort of the military police state. And so there was tremendous crime and violence at the time. So to give an example, the day I was flying, they were changing their constitution. It's a big deal, right? We don't change our constitution here too often. So it's this really interesting historical moment to be traveling. But to your point, I remember that was a trip that we didn't tell my grandparents until after I got back.
Did you go by yourself?
Yeah, because we didn't want to worry anybody. There were a lot of carjackings and a lot of shooting. It was a country in transition. Being able to go down there, I saw a lot of really met a ton of fascinating people, and I stayed with a family there. And their daughter had also been an essay contest winner. And so they were kind enough to host me.
Whenever I talk to young kids about, from a mentoring perspective, I've talked about this concept of a decision. And I've used my grandfather as an example. He made a decision as a young boy in Sicily, who was poor and orphan, to somehow, some way get on a boat and come to America. And through that, just 2 generations later, all of his grandchildren are inordinately more financially successful and set as a lifestyle than he could have ever, imagined. It was just that one decision where he hustled and he worked and he figured it out. And that's another example. Like, the trajectory of what you've done could look very different had you not been the one to decide you're going to write that essay.
It was that decision.
Like, it's just that one
absolutely
decision.
The decision to write the essay. I had an idea for what I wanted to say in the essay. There was at least one or a few other students at the school that were writing essays, and they were kind of paired with some teachers. And I was like, I know what I want to do. So I just knocked it out on my own. It's hard to imagine this, but, I submitted my essay through my AOL account that I set up for the purpose of applying for this competition.
Wow.
But it was like, I hit send, and it's like, how do I know that it got there? Right. And I'd spent all this time on this essay, so I didn't trust it enough. And so not only did I email my submission to them, I also went and FedExed it. It's funny now you would basically say, well, email is the most effective, and, you can track it and people can reply to you and let you know they got it. But I so wanted to make sure that it got there that I sent it multiple ways.
Kind of moving to now, like, your professional life, you did all this, you went to UC Santa Barbara. By the way, what did you get your degree in?
So I studied political science with an emphasis in international relations, which very much relates back to, all the travels that we just talked about. And that time also. I guess I was in college. I was able to do the Malaysia trip, and then there was a trip that followed on the kind of the South Africa experience. That was a trip to Ethiopia, and that was a huge eye opener also, right? It was fascinating to be in a place where we had internet at the hotel conference center, where the conference was being hosted. At the same time, the electricity wasn't necessarily reliable. And so you would have, blackouts, and it's like, okay, conference is going to go offline for a couple hours till it comes back on, whatever. And kind of sorting through that. So it was an interesting combination of, on the one hand, Ethiopia, fascinating place, wonderful people, great food, great dancers, great singers. I mean, just amazing hospitality, some beautiful venues for the conference. At the same time, the most poverty that I had ever seen. So a huge eye opener for me, right? You're riding in the car between hotel and conference center, seeing folks trying to make it work. And they, at the time, also were in a time of conflict. So, going through the airport was a big, kind of shock to me, because there were a lot of folks, a lot of military
state
with guns there, because they were having a civil war with Eritrea at the time. So yeah, it was a really interesting time to have all those experiences. So I majored in political science, and then, as with many experiences, one of the most important things about going to school was the friends that I made. And so one of the best friends that I made at UC Santa Barbara was Ryan Huff. And so he was a business major, but he was constantly coding, constantly building websites, building little apps, working in IT. He had a job in IT at the time, going through school. And so he and I used to get together and just kind of have these jam sessions where we'd brainstorm about, man, what's the next big thing, right? We're reading all these stories. This is late 90s. We're reading these stories from Silicon Valley about these tech startups, and we were excited by them. And so we were trying to figure out, what should we do? So we ended up, building websites for local clients and doing some projects. But at least at that time, we didn't go headlong into a startup, but we really wanted to. I'll give you an example. One night we kind of specced out this whole, this is how to manage identity on the internet. And we were kind of excited, like we were onto something. And then the next day, Microsoft announces Microsoft Passport. This is identity on the internet. We got it all figured out. And we're like, yeah, actually Microsoft is much more suited to figuring this out than we were, at least at the time. But at least we were thinking about it, right? We were interested in participating in the game. After school, Ryan and I started Cirrus Insight together, a software company that we built here in Knoxville and in California, where he lives. So
what'd you do between that? What was going on in that period between, graduation and you guys founding Cirrus?
Yeah, a lot of things. The first thing I did after graduating college was work for a high-speed internet company in Santa Barbara. We ran T1 through T3 lines at the time, and fractional T1 lines to companies, nonprofits, universities, and they would pay for the bandwidth. And that was a very successful business. We did work in California. We did work in New Mexico with the National Lab. We had clients kind of throughout the West and Southwest. And then part of what was a fascinating experience about that, it was my boss, Michael, who's a mentor for me. And I remember I was operations manager. So I was responsible for things ranging from, if the internet goes down, I lived the closest to the network operations center. It was my job to drive there, get the generator out of the shed, put gas in the generator, fire it up, and run an extension cord into the server room to, quote, bring the servers back online. So everything from that, kind of on the tech side, and it's kind of the basic infrastructure side, to managing inbound activity. So people were interested in talking with us, doing business with us. And I remember asking Michael, hey, how would you like me to vet these for you? What meetings do you want to take? If they're looking for you to travel and meet them somewhere like Colorado, when do you want to go? And he basically said, well, I'll meet with anyone to talk about anything at any time. And so that, in many ways, kind of was the beginning of this idea in my head of, there's no need to put up a big gate and try to vet folks and figure out opportunities, because you don't really know until you have those conversations. So I remember that what he told me back then, 20 plus years ago, is something that's important. Like, I do believe in the power of conversation and being very open and saying yes almost always, or certainly more often than we say no to opportunities, even though as we know from all the books and successful people have written, like you gotta learn to say no. Yes, it's important. You can't overwhelm yourself, but at the same time, you say no too much. Sometimes, it's saying yes that gets you in the door, that opens up these opportunities, like writing the essay in school, or with Ryan, right? Ryan came up with the idea for Cirrus Insight and ran it by me. And I said, yes, I'm interested in getting involved. I'll build the first website for that, and I'll call some original customers and see if we can get this thing started. So saying yes, became a theme at that company. Now, another interesting business experience was that California state legislature then passed a law that deregulated internet in California. And so basically, for the predecessors of Verizon in California, they no longer had to sell through us. They could sell direct to businesses and consumers. And so our, for lack of a better phrase, like our business was kind of cooked overnight.
Wow.
It took longer than that, right? We had customers to serve and kind of wind down, but by deregulating, they were able to offer the service for a lot less money because there was no company in the middle to manage the network. So that was kind of the beginning of the end for that startup experience. But I had a great experience there. And then after that, did a number of different jobs in Santa Barbara, and then moved to Washington, D.C., where I'd done an internship and did work out there. Did some lobbying on Capitol Hill, primarily for youth serving organizations. So we did a lot of advocacy for the National Runaway and Homeless Youth Act and related legislation, and then did some work in healthcare consulting.
In Knoxville, you probably first became known because of Cirrus. It was this kind of California company that all of a sudden landed in Knoxville, Tennessee, and a lot of people are like, what, a software company building a software product here? What's going on? Tell us that story of how you and Ryan sort of began to build this thing.
Ryan and I had kept in touch over the years. He had developed a lot of expertise in software and on the Salesforce platform in particular, and said, this is a great platform, really well done API. It's got great infrastructure. Let's look at an opportunity to do something here. And especially he saw a gap between a lot of companies at that time moving off of Outlook and on to Gmail, basically taking their email and their calendar and their tasks and documents to the cloud, right? So at that time, if companies wanted to go to the cloud, it meant moving to Google, because Google was first mover in that space with Gmail. And so even though a lot of Gmail users at the time, probably about 500 million users, were just individuals that just wanted an @Gmail account, there were more and more businesses moving to Google for that service. And so we said, well, there already exists a little connector between Outlook and Salesforce, but there isn't a connector between Gmail, and a lot of people are moving there. And cloud is for real. A lot of people are moving to cloud. So what if we came up with a connector between Gmail and Salesforce, and we kind of saw some apps that were out there that could put information into the browser through a browser extension? And so that looked like a good technique for achieving what he wanted to do. So he started coding, and then got in touch with me and said, what do you think about this idea? I was working in fundraising and development at the time at Maryville College, where my wife was a professor. And so I said, well, this is really interesting because I'm having to work in a customer relationship management platform. It wasn't Salesforce, but it was similar. And I said, so I get the pain that some of these salespeople must be having, because it's a hassle to copy and paste emails or forward them into a system to keep track of the relationship. And so I get the benefit of putting something into Gmail where I could just see my customer information right away without leaving the inbox. And I can sync data into the CRM to keep track of the relationships over time. Makes sense to me. I get it, but don't take my word for it, right? Let me start making some calls. So essentially, while Ryan was coding, my job in parallel was to go out and talk with prospective partners, prospective customers. We're building this app. What would you want it to have in it? What do you want to see? How do you want it to work? What are your use cases? How many customers do you have? How many users do you have? And then kind of build the website and kind of start up the marketing engine. So our partnership through the life of the business was Ryan led product and development from Irvine in California, where he lives. And I basically led sales, marketing, and support, kind of, business operations, if you will, from here in Knoxville. Well, we started the company when I lived in Maryville. So at the time, there was one other company that made a mobile app that was, I think, shopping related in Maryville. So I got in touch with him right away just to say, hey, we're also in the software game. This is super exciting. And he's like, oh, that's great. I thought I was the only one. And I said, I think you were. So we jumped in and got it going and built it for the first, 2-3 years in in Maryville, and then, moved the office, and we also moved our house from Maryville to Knoxville at that point, and started to grow the company even more.
Obviously, we missed a piece. You got married at some point.
I'm what I call a trailing spouse. And it's interesting, the more people that you connect with and meet throughout Knoxville, there are a lot of people here that come with their spouse because they were attracted to work here by TVA, Oak Ridge, University of Tennessee, in my case, Maryville College, places that attract a lot of talent. And along with that talent comes the spouses. I am one of those. And so I arrived here and, got to work at Maryville College, had a great experience there, supporting scholarships and helping some of the capital campaigns and endowment funding, and then had this opportunity to grow a business, do a startup with Ryan. And that was something we've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to do it. And so, really for me, it was an easy decision to jump in, because it's something you just don't pass that up. My daughter at the time was 1, and I remember that my son was getting ready to be born, right as we were trying to get the company launched. And so I was hustling to finish the first kind of full-blown version of the website, and was able to get it launched at midnight. And then the next day my son was born. Wow. So that way the website was out there and hopefully attracting some customers, which it did. And then the next day we had the big day where we welcomed our son. So that's
pretty awesome. That's a really cool story.
Yeah. Carson was born the next day, and Sonoma was 1. And then, I remember fast forward, 6 months, 9 months, Sonoma's a toddler. She's walking around the house. She's got a little toy phone. She's holding up the phone, walking around, kind of talking into the phone. And I was like, "Hey, Sonoma, what are you up to? Who are you talking to?" And she looked at me and she went, "Shh, I'm talking to Ryan." Because that's what she saw me doing all day, right? Like awesome. At that time, it was just me and Ryan running the company. And so I was on the phone with Ryan sometimes 5-6 hours a day. And so she was used to me walking around the house with the phone, talking to Ryan. So she figured she'd get in on that too. So they were great helpers.
You founded a company and built it while you had 2 kids under 2.
Yeah.
And your wife was working full time.
Yep. It was a great time to do it. I have a lot of really great memories of that time, honestly. And it's sort of interesting. We're doing the interview here right at the end of 2020, a pandemic year where a lot of people have had to hustle and take care of kids at home while also working from home. And so this is a pretty normal thing this year. But I have a lot of great memories of 2011 launching the company, and being on a customer call or a conference call and getting really creative with the mute unmute button, right? So it's like mute, changing my son's diaper, unmute. Yeah, that sounds good. Mute, right? It's fun. It's fun to hustle. The days were exciting. And, it was many years later where I saw kind of like a 3-part question, like, do you want to do something or get involved with something? And it was like, okay, does it excite you? If it's not exciting, probably skip it. Does it excite you? Does it challenge you? Is it going to be just easy, in which point it might sort of erode the excitement? But is it exciting? Does it challenge you? And does it add value? And of course, all 3 of those things can be defined however you want to define them.
Yeah.
But if you can check all 3 boxes, then you're kind of onto something. For me, being able to join with Ryan and launch and scale up Cirrus Insight was something it was exciting every day. There's no question it was challenging. It's definitely the hardest job that I've ever had, and as a result, the most rewarding. And did it add value? Thankfully, unequivocally, yes. I mean, one of the most fun things about the whole process, in addition to growing the company and being able to work with a lot of great people and hire on, tremendous talent, was the customer delight. Like thinking back to some of those conversations where customers were just kind of speechless, like, "Oh my gosh, this is going to save me and my entire team like hundreds, thousands of hours over the course of the year." Like, it was a game changer for us. Wow. And just that delight that they had was awesome. One of the ways we learned that was actually in the first year after launching the company. Amazon Web Services, where we're hosted, had an outage. And folks may remember this outage because it knocked out Netflix, it knocked out Instagram when those companies were big, smaller than they are now. But still big, and it knocked them down for about 24 hours, sometimes up to 48 hours. And then, tens of thousands of little small startups like us. So when it went down, I happened to be taking the kids and family, and Ryan was taking his kids and family to Disneyland. So we were both at Disneyland, trying to take, a day with the families, have a great time. And all of a sudden my phone starts ringing and doesn't stop, right? It was just calls coming in over calls. And so, my first thought was the word's getting out. Everybody wants to sign up, right? But then quickly it was like, no, something's wrong. And it was all the customers calling saying, hey, the app is down. We can't log in. I was like, oh shoot, we're going to try to troubleshoot this, but at the end of the day, we're reliant on our provider. So as soon as they come back online, we'll get ourselves back online too. But we don't have we're not a huge company. We don't have failover. And in fact, even the big companies didn't at that time. I remember talking to them and saying like, well, here's the thing. We're going to be online as soon as possible. We really appreciate your patience. But for now, just kind of go back to your previous workflow. And the customers were like, oh, no, that's definitely not possible. Like, like one of them even said, like, we may just send people home for the day.
Wow.
I was like, really? So you're not going to just revert back to doing some of the manual things? They're like, no, everyone's so used to using your application. That's the new way of doing business. We're not going to make them go back. We don't want them to go back to their previous habits. We want them to keep using it. And I remember talking with her after I got off that call. I talked with Ryan. I said, I think we're onto something here, because it's indispensable for some of these salespeople and some of these sales teams. So bad news, the app is down right now. Great news, we're indispensable. So as soon as we come back up, we've got a great story to tell the future customers.
And that's part 1 of my chat with Brandon Bruce. Stay tuned for part 2 when we jump into the story of building Cirrus Insight and now what he's working on today.